In 1896, the advertising industry began using the world's finest psychologists to brainwash us into buying their rubbish. Today, however, we are bombarded by the finest algorithms the world has ever seen, specifically designed to uncover our deepest desires, understand what drives us, and then to use that knowledge against us to sell us an unrealistic vision of an idealized lifestyle. The advertising industry wants us to feel that we are not good enough. The advertising industry wants to stoke unhappiness so that we want to buy their rubbish in order to achieve that idealized lifestyle that they present as reality. In 2019, the advertising industry spent $750 billion US worldwide. From the earliest days, advertisers began targeting our vanity. They began showing images of people just like ourselves, but just slightly more successful, slightly more desirable, maybe even slightly more attractive. They implied if you bought product X, you'd make yourself more desirable, more important, more respected. By targeting our vanity, the advertisers were bypassing our powerful frontal lobes, responsible for judgment and reason, and targeting our much more primitive limbic system, responsible for emotion and desires. In order to target the broadest possible audience, movies and TV shows became simpler and simpler and simpler. Big, complex ideas were reduced down to sound bites. Image became paramount. Newspaper stories and television news reports became shorter and shorter, a series of sound bites, so people had less time and less information upon which to make up their minds. Instead of presenting both sides of the story and allowing the viewer or the reader to make up their own minds, reporting became strident, tabloid journalism. One side were heartless villains, the other side were helpless victims. The newspapers and television reports made up our minds for us. The more sensational the reporting, the higher the number of viewers or readers, and the higher the advertising dollar. But this led to the decline of the ability to reason, the decline of the ability to balance both sides of a story, the decline of the Western mind. For thousands of years, we have taught children not to judge by appearance. We have raised children with stories about characters who began in great poverty and great hardship. Sometimes the hero of the story was crippled, disfigured, or had a disability. They endured a great deal of prejudice, but through nothing but pure determination, they triumphed. And very frequently, those who had abused and mistreated them found themselves in humble circumstances by the end, and learnt the harsh lesson: do not judge by appearance, do not mistreat those less fortunate than yourselves. For thousands of years, we've taught children not to judge by appearance, but the advertising industry has been teaching us to do just that for 125 years. They have praised the beautiful and wealthy, and they have disdained and ridiculed those who live in unfortunate circumstances. The writer Norman Mailer said, "The 1970s was a decade when image became preeminent. People put emphasis on the surface of things, on the appearance of things, because nothing deeper was going on." Television and movies were presenting images of idealized lifestyles. Young women were presented as living in glamorous apartments in glamorous areas of New York, working at glamorous jobs, and dating an endless succession of glamorous men. By the 1990s, the media began reporting that people were increasingly dissatisfied with real life and had begun hankering after the idealized lifestyles portrayed on TV. Decades of television has narrowed people's minds. We have gone from looking outwards, we have gone from hundreds of years of grand adventure, taking huge risks, and aiming impossibly high, whether in the fields of science, medicine, physics, astronomy, or exploration, to simply following mindless influences. The effect on children's minds has been catastrophic. Every study ever done on television has shown that children who watch television grow up cognitively diminished. For the first time in human history, the average IQ in the Western world is dropping. Today, the internet, combined with the world's most sophisticated algorithms and levels of psychological insight that the great psychologists could only dream about, routinely brainwashes children as young as 2, bombarding them with sights and sounds engineered to create dopamine spikes in their brains. not merely keeping them hooked, but actually rewiring their neurons and physically changing their brain chemistry. By the age of 10, they have seen so many images of influencers and so many images of unrealistic success, they are now depressed, anxious, and in some cases, suicidal. The rise and rise and rise of mental illness in children in our society directly correlates with the rise and rise and rise of social media. School grades have been dropping for decades in Australia, America, and the UK. People have become less and less and less aware of the outside world. In the UK, once the highest educated population in the world, a graduate of a UK school was considered to be as intelligent and as worldly as a university graduate in the US. So the United States used to poach all the brightest of the British school children as they left their schools. Now the UK has sunk to such a level, huge swathes of the population have only two interests: reality TV and football. Many of them have no idea how many world wars there were, what their dates were, who won, who lost, who the enemy was. Mindless television shows, mindless movies, and mindless social media combined with mindless advertising has completely destroyed any shred of intelligence in what once passed for their minds. The UK, which once had the brightest and most knowledgeable people in the world, now has some of the stupidest. In Australia, our school grades have been plummeting for decades. Meanwhile, rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide keep rising and rising and rising. We need to get our children away from the screens and outdoors, playing in parks, climbing trees, riding BMX bikes, paddling canoes, swimming with the sharky biters. Let's get our ruddy little blighters outdoors, going on bushwalks, climbing mountains, and getting bruises and scrapes, rather than getting mentally ill, incredibly depressed, and sometimes committing suicide. Suicide is the leading cause of death for children in Australia. And the media, the advertising industry, and social media is to blame. Students in the New South Wales region, where 3 children have taken their own lives in recent weeks, have reportedly been targeted in disgusting TikTok videos, according to a report by Stephanie Beto in the Herald Sun. Suicide, bullying, anxiety, and the social polarization created by millions of bots is deliberately pushing people apart, splitting our society in half, pushing people to extremes in order to exploit them. The results have been catastrophic. Almost the entire Western world knows no other way of living than to be a consumer. The few people who are free of consumerism are often travelers, those who walk the earth with nothing but a backpack, or who live out of a car or a van traveling across many countries, or those who circumnavigate the earth in a tiny boat, living off fish, rainwater, and sunlight. These people are truly alive. If we do not wake up to the all-encompassing catastrophe that is consumerism and the hold it has upon our civilization, our minds, and our children, then we will feel a great deal of regret when we are lying on our deathbeds and we realize life passed us by, and we let it happen. The obsession with surface rather than depth, the belief that appearance is reality, has led to the rise of the extrovert. This means that people who have never known fear or hardship and who are raised by loving parents are likely to be loud, outgoing, and confident. Meanwhile, those who have come from great poverty or great hardship are likely to be quietly spoken, fearful, and avoid social contact. Thus, extroverts are disproportionately rewarded in our society. Extroverts are disproportionately given credit, often for achievements that were really the work of introverts. Introverts are more likely to be bullied, more likely to be mistreated, more likely to be abused, less likely to be believed in a court of law. Extroverts, on the other hand, are treated much better, receive much higher pay, are promoted much more often, and are believed much more often in a court of law. In more cases than not, introverts are society's givers, extroverts are society's takers. It is society's introverts who make the great discoveries, who save millions of lives through medical breakthroughs. It is frequently society's extroverts who get the credit. The sense of fairness that existed in previous generations has gone to be replaced by a sense of status. People are treated relative to their perceived status rather than being treated fairly. Schools, law courts, and HR departments are more likely to side with extroverts, people viewed as high status, even though these people are much more likely to be bullies, and they are less likely to side with introverts, quietly spoken people who are more likely to be victims of bullying. The change from valuing fairness to valuing status has led to an explosion of bullying, an explosion of mental illness, an explosion of rates of suicide, and the fragmentation of our society. As people are increasingly judging others by appearance, narcissism is epidemic. The rise and rise and rise of narcissism has led to the decline of personal responsibility. We now see violent incidents that would be unthinkable in previous generations. Paramedics are violently assaulted while trying to save people's lives. Nurses are violently assaulted while trying to save people's lives. Stewardesses are repeatedly assaulted on aeroplanes. The rise in aggression, violence, and bullying is the direct result of the desire for instant gratification and the sense of entitlement created by the advertising industry. For many decades, advertisers have said, "You are special, you deserve more, you are worth it, you are entitled to more." What they have not said is if you demand more, then you must give more in return. Advertisers have created an ever-expanding sense of entitlement and an ever-declining sense of personal responsibility, and an absolute explosion of narcissism and violence. In the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, he says, Orwell feared those who would ban books. Huxley feared that there would be no need to ban books because there would be nobody left who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared we would be swamped with so much information we would relax into passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture. Great minds. They study history, they understand the present, and they accurately predict the future. So George Orwell feared that we might become captive, that we might be denied information, that we might be denied books. Huxley imagined a much worse future when nobody would see any need to read a book. There would be so much information available, we would be obsessed with irrelevant things instead of keeping an eye on our government as their level of corruption rises and rises and rises, as the ultra-rich get richer and richer and richer, as working class wages stagnate, and as the ultra-rich find new ways to pay us half of award wages, the gig economy and delivery services and Uber. Clever new ways to pay people half what they're worth while they are busy being distracted by the media. When our society went from books to television, people lost their interior lives. When you read a book, you are forced to make images in your own mind. Your brain is much, much more active, but when you watch television, you are passive. All the images are being provided to you. The dead world of television encourages no creativity. The images are handed to you on a plate. And the rise in depression, the decline in intelligence, and the slow erosion of good values are the result. Those of us who have worked in service stations, those of us who have worked as cleaners, those of us who have worked as waiters, we are viewed as expendable. We are low status, therefore we have no rights. We have gone from valuing fairness to valuing status, and this sort of mindless shit that comes out of Hollywood has a lot to answer for. Advertising, television, and movies has distracted our population so that the rich and their government lackeys can steal and steal and steal. For 15 years, as I endured unimaginable violence and absolute starvation throughout my childhood, I turned to books. Books were my escape. When my hair was sticky with blood and when blood ran down my forehead, I would turn to books. I would imagine I was in a coral atoll in the Pacific Islands, or I would imagine I was trekking through the Himalayas, or paddling a canoe down a jungle river in South America. Books allowed me to develop a vivid inner world when my outer world was nothing but violence and utter horror. Now I want to use my life experience to save people's lives, to save children's minds, and to save our country's future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William Flynn. I will be running for a seat in the New South Wales Senate. Be sure to vote this election. Cheerio.